Let's talk about school, shall we? It surprised me to learn, but to my right I've got David Kurten, a man who has been responsible for teaching children their sex education in schools in the past. You're a man of all talents, aren't you? The reason I'm talking about this today is because there is concerns that in some of these lessons, parents are not getting access to see what material their kids are being taught. I think as a parent, it's crucial in topics like sex education, all this gender stuff now that everyone seems to be obsessed with. I would want to look at that, determine it's suitable for my kid, and if I determined it wasn't, I would A, want them to, probably cancel it or whatever, or B, I'd take my kid out the lesson. Where do you stand on this? Because a lot of these organisations are saying that the parents can't be given access to this material because it's a breach of copyright.
First of all, I need to clarify what I was doing. I taught science, so as part of that, I taught biology, chemistry, physics to 11 to 14-year-olds, and I taught reproduction as part of general science to lots of children in lots of schools that I worked in until I became in.
Can you imagine doing that now? Yeah. It would be a minefield teaching these kids these days about reproduction. Anyway, go on.
The thing is, so I would make a distinction between sex education, which is what I did, teaching about reproduction, and sexuality education, which is what the UN and the World Health Organization call this kind of program that's being rolled out around the world everywhere. And in England, it's called relationships and sex education. That's the branding of it. It's way, way more than just teaching reproduction. It's teaching all kinds of non-reproductive sexual acts. It's teaching about transgenderism. It's teaching about LGBT stuff. And a lot of parents don't want their children to be taught this kind of thing because it's against their values, and that's absolutely fine. And the Human Rights Convention actually supports their right to say, well, my children, if I want them not to learn about these things that are conflict with my values, they can take them out of lessons. But this is going to children of a lower and lower and lower age, and right down to 4- and 5-year-olds now are being given material which is explicit, and it's sexualising material, and absolutely it shouldn't be given to kids at all. So I 100% support parents' rights to see all material in this RSE subject, relationships and sex education, and also PSHE, which is other...
And do what once they've seen it then? So if they see this stuff, they say this isn't appropriate, then what?
Then they should be able to say, no, I'm going to take my children out of this subject. I'm not going to let my children sit in a lesson where these kind of sexualising materials...
You don't think that they should try and stop the material being taught? You think that they should just be able to remove their child from the teaching of it?
Well, both. I mean, some schools are adamant and insist that they're going to go and teach these things, which I think is absolutely wrong. And this has come in with a 2017 Act of Parliament, the Children and Social Care Act, I think, which brought in compulsory mandatory relationships education for children in all ages, from primary school, 4 or 5, right up to 18. So it's compulsory now. There are schools, some schools don't, they go out of their way to make sure that there isn't any age inappropriate material, so that parents don't have to worry. But some schools are full of activist teachers who deliberately want to give the most sexualising material they can possibly find to teach the youngest children that are there all about transgenderism, etc., which goes against the wishes of the vast majority of parents, and it shouldn't be done.
One of the most cringe-worthy moments I've had on this show before was when I had to, I didn't have to, I chose to read out this passage from this book that was aimed at, I think it was 7-year-olds or something like that. It was... I can blush even thinking about it. If you're a long-time viewer, you might recall it. It was appalling and deeply inappropriate. And I asked the author, I got the author and I said, why are you doing this? Why are you labelling this for 7-year-olds? I would have said it was almost soft porn. And she thought it was absolutely fine. I thought it was appalling. Anyway, Emma, your thoughts?
There are important things that we need to teach children around what is inappropriate sexual activity. The NSPCC are very, very good and very strong on the fact that we absolutely need to teach children what they should be looking out for to be able to say that's not right. And that is a big part of what we call sex and relationship education. So when we simply say there should be no sex and relationship education, we would be taking away some really important safeguarding information that children should have and should be informed with. The thing that sexualises children as they move from 9 to 13 is hormones, is adolescence, is puberty. That we all go through a period where we go from innocence to drivers, have your first kiss, have your first fumble, whatever. A better informed child will know more about A, being able to set their boundaries in confidence, and B, what those boundaries should be and how to manage them. It is really important that we don't create a sense of permissiveness where children don't feel able to say no, but we do that by good education. What does worry me about this story is that there should be no sense that corporations have the ultimate right to stop parents seeing material because of their copyright. That, for me, is a massive infringement of the corporate rights taking over anything from parents. So I think parents should be able to see the materials that their children are being presented. I think we need to have a conversation about how to do good, adequate, age-appropriate children and sexual health and relationship education. But I don't think we can be as plain as saying it's no good, because kids do need to know how to set boundaries, how to manage consent. And that's a really, really important part of learning to grow through puberty.
There are programmes, for example, All About Me. This has been in the press, that is, some of it is teaching about self-stimulation to 4-year-olds, and that's been going into some schools. That is clearly totally age inappropriate and totally wrong, whatever measure you use. I mean, this is the kind of thing that is happening in some schools in England right now, and also in Wales, because they've introduced it there, and Scotland as well, because they're doing it there as well. So parents, they absolutely should have the right to see all of these things, but there are some things that simply shouldn't be going into any schools, whatever age they are. And I think, we should stick to what we had before, teach reproduction in secondary school, but primary school kids, they should be left to play with toys and stuff. Let kids be kids.
Primary school kids have been and can be abused by people, and they need to know where it's okay to say no to an adult. And that is a big part of what this education teaches them.
But you don't need to teach explicit materials.
These kids, you don't need to teach explicit materials to do that, but you do need to teach consent, and that is part of sexual education, and that is age-appropriate primary school education, and that's what I'm supporting. I'm not saying we should be sticking porn in schools, but the other thing is, we are pretending that there's only 2 inputs into children's world, parents and schools. And actually, there's this whole other world they're getting. And if you don't teach them consent, TikTok will. And I'd much rather they were getting good, valid information that is run by organisations like the NSPCC than some of the people that you see on TikTok.
This is the wider issue is that parents should be the primary educators of their children. They should be controlling what their kids see on the internet and their mobile phones and smartphones. I mean, I don't think that, young children should have a smartphone at all, and they should be monitored totally on the internet.
But a lot of parents are not great parents, are they?
They're abdicating their responsibility. They need to take responsibility for their children, absolutely. This is something that you can't neglect as parents. So, I mean, this is a wider issue that we need to go back to a society where parents take responsibility as the primary educators and don't leave it to the schools, don't leave it to the state, don't leave it to TikTok. They've got to be in control.
Yeah, and I'm a big advocate of that. If you've got school-aged children, I would absolutely be getting in touch with their school and asking to see what content are your kids being taught? Because when I started delving into this, I read a story out, and it was awful, if you ask me. Maybe I'm just being a bit prudy, I don't know, but it made my eyes water, my hair curl, so it did. Adrian says, this is what's happened in America. All of this gives teachers free rein to indoctrinate children with woke Marxist propaganda, he says. Nick says a child's welfare is a responsibility of their parents. Teachers have no right or parental permission to do anything else. Teachers are charged with educating our children with set subjects and not their personal opinions or political views. Simon says, if my child's school can't tell me what they're teaching my children, I wouldn't be sending them to school. Surely, as a parent, I've got a right to know. Well, you would think so, but it is worth checking, particularly with this kind of subject, because if you ask me anyway, I think there's a few strange things going on. That is for sure. Keith says, I've got 9 children. 9 children, Keith? Oh, blimey.
Some sex ed.
Yeah. Keith says, Keith has 9 children and they were all taught sex education at home, not school. He says they're all now married with their own kids. It is nothing to do with the state, says Keith.